Good morning. So, if you or someone you love has been told that they have type 2 diabetes or that they're heading there, I want you to hear something that most doctors don't have time to discuss in a 15-minute conversation. Reversal really is possible, and it doesn't start necessarily with medication. So, welcome to Friday Morning Live, Joyful Medicine with Dr. Jen. I'm Dr. Jennifer Davis. I'm certified physician in pediatrics, pediatric adult care, and lifestyle medicine. And I help adults and families transform their metabolic health with joyful medicine that honors their lives, their cultures, and their humanity. This is where evidence based lifestyle medicine meets joy, community, and everyday living. So, today we're going to go deep on diabetes reversal. I'm answering questions that I hear most commonly from my patients, from community, and just in general. And I want you to drop yours in the comments. I'll answer them live. So let's get started. So one of the most common questions, first of things, is I wanted to address one of the things that commonly comes up, like what causes type 2 diabetes? And often the thought is that it's related to sugar, right? Consuming sugar, and that's going to elevate your blood sugar, and then that's what diabetes is. But actually it's much more nuanced than that. So what happens is if you have diabetes, yes, when you consume sugar, your blood sugar will go up. But so there's two types of diabetes, right? There's multiple types, but the two main things we talk about is insulin dependent diabetes and then type 2 diabetes, which is usually adult onset. And that means that your body has insulin. And so what insulin does is it helps the body use sugar, right? Use glucose. It moves the glucose into the cell and energy, sugar. Glucose is the energy that our body needs to function, right? That's where we get our energy. That's how our muscles move, how our organs work, how our brain works, right? And so with type 1 diabetes, we don't have the insulin. So we need to give exogenous insulin so that our body can use that glucose. But with type 2 diabetes, we actually have that insulin available. But what happens is, for one reason or the other, which I'll talk about a little bit more, the insulin is not working properly. And so our body tries to compensate by elevating that insulin higher and higher to try to help that glucose get into the cell. And when that's overwhelmed, what happens is our glucose rises and we have the formal diagnosis of diabetes or type 2 diabetes. And so it's not the sugar, right, that's causing it. The sugar is what we're seeing, but it's actually fat. It's fat that gets inside of the cell. So it's the lipids that get inside the cell and they interfere with the functioning of the cell so that the insulin does not work. That key can't unlock the door because there's goo stuck in it. And so that fat is what causes the problem. And so where does that fat come from? So the fat can come from the diet. So it can be dietary fat, saturated fat, which is a cause of insulin. It can be from excess calories, and your body creates fat, and that fat can get inside the cell and come up the process. So to address the underlying cause is not necessarily to stop the sugar. Yes, if the sugar is part of the diet that's causing you to consume a lot of calories, leading to the fat, then maybe. But so if you, the common way that people manage diabetes is they decrease carbohydrates, so then you have less sugar. But it's not reversing the underlying cause. Now, maybe if you lose weight and you continue to restrict calories, then that will be longstanding, and then you can have control. But ultimately, we want to reverse that fat, reverse that process, get to the underlying cause, and then that's where the power is. So let's just talk a little bit about that. Can you actually reverse diabetes? So, type 1 diabetes, where you lack insulin and your body's not making insulin, okay, that cannot be reversed. But even that can be managed better with some of the things that I'm going to talk about today. Because even with type 2 1 diabetes, often what happens over time is the need for insulin increases. The amount of insulin that you need to achieve the same effect increases unless you address the things that I'm going to talk about. So, helping your body use it better, causing fewer blood sugar spikes and kind of helping the body function better, that can actually decrease your needs, your insulin needs. Not completely, but at least so that you need less. But with type 2 diabetes, actually, with these changes, you can actually reverse type 2 diabetes. You can cause remission. They call it remission of type 2 diabetes. And that is when your blood sugar remains in the normal range or less than 6.5, which is the threshold for diagnosing diabetes, formally, right? The formal diagnosis of diabetes is when the hemoglobin A1C is above 6.5, which means that your blood sugar has been elevated for 3 months. Yet that blood sugar, that hemoglobin A1C gives you an idea of what your blood sugar has been for the 3 months preceding. That's often another question I get. People don't understand what hemoglobin A1C means. And that's really important. It's important to know what the numbers mean so then you can make the changes and you can work towards improving things. So hemoglobin A1C is what is measured, and that's measuring the basically the glucose on that red blood cell. And red blood cells live for about 3 or 4 months. And so that is giving you an idea of what your blood sugar has been over those 3 or 4 months before the blood is drawn. And so when you achieve a time when your hemoglobin A1C is low, below 6.5 for at least 3 months, then you know that you've cause reversal of type 2 diabetes and remission. And so often we are diagnosed with prediabetes, which means that the blood sugar is above, I think it's 5.6 is the cutoff for prediabetes. So that range between 5.6 and 6.5, you're in the prediabetes range, and you can do something to help lower your blood sugar and improve control, help that insulin work better, and actually avoid progressing to diabetes. So that's really important to know. So diabetes reversal, it can actually be a cure, can be a remission. And if you continue to do the things that support your health, you can continue to improve. And so that's the other question I get. Is it actually possible? And it is actually possible. And how do you know you're a candidate? Can everybody reverse their type 2 diabetes? So that's a key point, right? So again, we talked about how type 1 diabetes, you require insulin. Your body never will make insulin, so you will need insulin for life. But with type 2 diabetes, in almost every case, it can be reversed. Obviously, it depends on how long it's been standing, because when you have diabetes for a long period of time, then sometimes eventually the process that's causing the insulin resistance in the beginning can actually damage the pancreas and can decrease the ability for the pancreas to make insulin. So in which case, you may actually, again, be able to reduce your need, the amount of insulin, but maybe you may not be able to reverse it completely. But in most cases, you are able to reverse type 2 diabetes. And so that's an important thing. We often think that the only step forward is more medication, adding more layers of medication, adding more restriction, making it more complex. But actually, by addressing the underlying cause, we can actually reverse it, come off medication, and actually not need medication for life. And so, how do you reverse diabetes? Often I hear, do I have to avoid carbohydrates for the rest of my life? Maybe I need to go keto. I need to go high protein. What do I need to do to reverse diabetes? So, I want to say that I actually recommend going the opposite, right? I actually recommend a high carbohydrate diet. And I'm not talking about, cookies and crackers and cakes and, highly processed foods. I'm talking about complex carbohydrates, which I really like to talk about the foods that you should eat as opposed to the macros, right? Because we don't eat a macro. I don't eat a protein. I eat a food. And so when we focus on those foods that actually tend to have higher carbohydrates, those foods actually are more healing. So instead of low carb or keto, I look at the quality of the food overall that you should consume. And that dietary pattern is actually changing that dietary pattern can actually help lower the blood sugar spikes, but also take some of that fat that's inside of the cell outside of the cell. It can help lower inflammation, which is another mechanism of diabetes and progression of diabetes. It can improve your gut health. It can help your brain function better so you make better choices. It can stimulate your natural GLP-1 system, which is another thing I'll talk about. So as opposed to going low carb or avoiding certain foods, I look again at the quality and the amount of those foods that you're consuming. And when you consume those foods in a large amount, you actually promote healing. Another one I get is, do I have to be plant-based? And plant-based diets absolutely can reverse diabetes. And I will say a whole food plant-based diet, so focused on unprocessed foods as opposed to the processed plant foods, because again, it's the quality of the foods that you consume, rather than the type. So the high quality plant foods. So yes, eating more plants is the mainstay of reversing type 2 diabetes. You have to be completely plant-based. I guess it depends on the severity and progression of your illness. The more plant-based you go, the faster the progression. But again, I like to focus on including more as opposed to what I eliminate. So fruits and vegetables should be the mainstay, right? Mostly fruits and vegetables, whole grains, intact whole grains. So I'm not talking about white bread, or, consuming a lot of, you know, processed foods. It's the least processed form of the food. So I just want to point out that I don't want to say that there is any food that's off limits forever, but the key is the majority of what you consume needs to be whole unprocessed foods, and that's the key. And the least processed form of the grains are the most powerful because they have those soluble fibers that help soluble fiber, which helps again lower the saturated fat, lower the saturated fat in the other foods that you're consuming, but lower the fat in your body. It helps blunt those glucose spikes, and it helps support your gut health. So these are all beneficial reasons for eating fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds. Those are the mainstay of what you should be consuming in that order. Fruits and vegetables the most abundantly, whole grains and beans and legumes next, nuts and seeds as part of that diet. Fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds. And then an abundance of herbs and spices, which I think I kind of include those in the fruits and vegetables part. So you can have as much of those things as you want. And those foods actually are the key to reversing diabetes. Another one I get, because I'm always talking about stress. People ask, well, does stress really have an effect? And actually, it really does. We know that when we are stressed, it stimulates cortisol, and that is an adaptive response because when we are stressed, our body thinks that we are under attack. And if we have to fight a bear, or if we have to face this attack, then we need as much energy available quickly as possible. So that causes our body to release more glucose. And the problem is, a lot of us are under chronic stress. So it's that chronically elevated cortisol, which not only elevates our blood sugar, but it also increases inflammation. It affects how our digestion works, all of these things, and it affects how we store or not store that extra energy. So it causes more fat storage as opposed to less. And so this is an important thing. So stress absolutely has an effect. And by the same token, like mindfulness and being less stressed, really harnessing that, I like to say, joy factor, working on that actually stimulates happy hormones, which helps our body relax, improves our digestion, lowers that cortisol, stimulates those other um, healing systems in our body, stimulates that natural GLP-1 pathway in our body. So it helps us make better decisions about food. It helps us feel better about food, helps us sleep better, and so many other things. So that stress and mindfulness, they're opposite ends, but yes, so stress definitely has an effect. Um, what about GLP-1s? Where does that fit into it? Why is everybody talking about those? So GLP-1s are amazing. They're life-changing for so many. They've helped people, lose weight, which is, I guess, a lot to talk about, but really control diabetes that has been very difficult to control. They help with satiety. They help with food noise, which people talk about a lot. And so they do many things. But you know what GLP-1s are actually doing is they are stimulating or exploiting a natural pathway that already exists in our body. So we have a GLP-1 pathway, glucagon-like peptide, and that is something that is secreted when we eat. It tends to be secreted and released and broken down very quickly. But the way to harness that power and have it continue on are things like eating a high fiber meal. So again, those foods that I said to focus on, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, the thing that all of those foods have in common is that they are high in fiber. When we consume high fiber foods, it helps our satiety, so it helps us be full longer, but it helps stimulate that system. And so it helps us just have more process the food better. It helps stimulate glucose uptake into the cell. It affects our gut health. It does so many things. So that high fiber is part of the stimulation of that natural GLP-1 pathway. Other way to support the natural GLP-1 pathway is again managing stress. It is really an important thing. When we part of the food noise, I think, comes around, and it's not at the time that you're faced with that food that you're having the noise or that you're surrounded by it, but it happens way before that. It happens when our nervous systems are are not being regulated properly. So we are often connected to these phones from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed. If it's not phone, it's some kind of technology. Everything is done on the computer these days. We're not spending enough time outside in natural daylight, walking in the forest, walking in the woods. These things are things that our body is yearning for. And if we are not in touch with these systems, if we're not taking some time away from the technology and really being in touch with ourselves, being more mindful, being more present, then it is hard for our nervous system to regulate anything. So it shows up as food noise, but it shows up in many other ways. It shows up in a lack of attention. It shows up in anxiety and depression. It shows up in a disrupted sleep. And all of these things compound over time. And so I just have to say that that is a big part of what we are facing these days with the elevation of um, more higher incidence of obesity and type 2 diabetes and heart disease and attention problems and all of these things. So yes, medication is very powerful, but also recognizing that we have these natural systems in our bodies that are meant to be supported, and ways to support them are, like I'm saying, the foods that I'm talking about, but also these really important factors like managing stress and getting more spending more time in touch with nature, spending more time just being present away from technology. Um, Also moving our body. I can't not talk about this. So this is another way that we can naturally support our GLP-1 system, is moving, and particularly moving after meals. So when we take a little, even 10-minute walk, it not only, especially if we do it without our cell phone, not only is it helping with that mindfulness and nervous system regulation, but it also helps the glucose uptake into the body. And do it with a friend or a family member, and then you're getting that community connection too, that social connection that we all also need to be more be more connected and more present and healthier, and help with again, this glucose control. Let me see. One of the other things, I don't know if anybody has any questions on here live. Again, feel free to share. If you do have questions, you can post them right in the chat there. But I'll say that one of the other things, we talked about GLP-1s and we talked about the diet. Um, One of the other things that comes up often is, what foods should I avoid? And I will say that one of the things, I always talk about how we should focus on what we eat, what we should consume, what we should eat in abundance of, rather than focusing on restriction. And that's really an important thing, because I think sometimes we get so caught up in what we shouldn't have, that we're restricting so much, then we're missing out on all of those foods that actually have healing properties. And it ends up causing more, because when we restrict so much, it actually causes more cravings if we're having not getting enough calories, or we're having some nutrient deficiencies. So really focusing on making sure we're getting that full complement of those foods that I mentioned: fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds, eating the rainbow, making sure that we're paying attention to our hunger cues, which comes over time as we eat more of those foods and we spend more time enjoying them and tasting them, and seeing how they feel in our body. Then we begin to become more in touch with, number one, the different flavors of more plant foods, but also how our body feels, and recognizing those hunger and satiety cues, which is really important with healing from diabetes, reversing diabetes, um, helping with diabetes remission. Another important thing to talk about is sleep. So sleep is another thing that, if we're not getting enough sleep, it affects our hunger hormones. It disrupts our natural hormonal systems. Not only, melatonin regulates not only our sleep, but it also helps integrate with other hormonal systems in our body. And so when we're not sleeping well, not only are we not, it's causing us stress, so elevating that cortisol again, but also it's affecting our hunger hormones. It's affecting the regulation of other hormones in our bodies. So sleep is really, really important, which I know sometimes when we have a chronic disease, when we have diabetes, it can be disrupted. but it's something to talk to your healthcare provider about, how to, better manage sleep. And sometimes medication is necessary. Sometimes a sleep study is important to recognize that your sleep is adequate, or if it's being disrupted for a certain reason. But again, technology is a big disruptor. So I will say that, bookending your day, this is one of the things I recommend to all of my patients, is bookending your recommend to myself and my children, making sure that you're not using the cell phone, the computer, watching TV, at least an hour before bed, because our sleep is affected by blue light, or our melatonin is affected by blue light, I should say. So if we are on the blue light, not only the light is affecting our natural circadian rhythms, we should have dim lights at night when it's time for bed. So thinking about how you can, start to dim the lights and lower the lights, but also being off the blue screen, because that is one of the most potent controllers of our melatonin. So avoiding the blue light at least an hour before bedtime, what that could be one of the most powerful things you do. Having like a bedtime routine, just to let your body know, okay, it is time to relax, it's time for bed. Um, and this again is really important. So that restorative sleep is vital when we're talking about helping with glucose control and reversing diabetes. Cultural foods. This is another thing I want to talk about. I've had often I've had so many people tell me that they have been told in the past that they have to eliminate certain foods that they have are part of their culture, like plantains, fufu, tortillas, um, many different things. And I think I said earlier, there's no food that's completely off limits. But again, I like to use fiber as the guide. So looking at for the least processed form of the food. But all of these foods, many of these cultural foods have fiber in them. So I often tell, my clients in my coaching program, and, other people that ask questions, that there's absolutely room for cultural foods, or foods that are shunned because they're high carbohydrate in your diet. It's a matter of, again, focusing on consuming majority of fruits and vegetables, intact whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds. And in that pattern, there are room for all types of foods. So I think that's really important. So yes, I think that there is room for tortillas and plantains and fufu. All of these things have fiber in them. So there's no reason to eliminate them because they have carbohydrates. Again, focusing on the quality of the foods that you consume rather than the, macro component is really important. It also just gives us a better sense of what to eat and how to put meals together. So, I went a little long today. I don't know. Again, feel free to comment on this video. I will continue to look back at comments if you have questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. I am going to be doing a 5-day challenge coming up. So you can register for the challenge. It's a 5-day, it's every day. It's going to be an educational, short educational prompt video, time to ask questions, guides and journals and recipes. And the goal of the 5-day challenge is to harness your natural GLP-1 system, learn how to do that, and take away some simple steps to start having control of your energy, your cravings, your diabetes, pre-diabetes, learning the steps it takes to avoid or reduce medication, and put you on the right path towards healing. So if you would like information on that, feel free to click the link below and get signed up. We will start on, I think it's the 23rd. Anyway, it'll be on the link, so check out the link. And again, post your question. Join me here every Friday morning at 9 a.m. for Friday Morning Live with Dr. Jen, Joyful Medicine. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining me.